Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to log in here while I set up Nate. Wow. Apologies for the background noise. It is windy outside. Okay, Nate, I think I promoted you to panelist here. You just might have to accept it. There we go. Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. I hope you're all safe and healthy at this time. And thanks again for joining us for day 8 of the coach development webinars. So today we hear from Nate Groenveld on the topic of training your block defense. Nate is currently the head coach of the men's varsity program at York University. And previously last summer, he was our Team Ontario Red boys head coach. So Nate will be presenting the content of his presentation now, and then at 7 p.m. tonight, we'll be back doing the question and answer session. I'll be monitoring the question and answer box during the presentation in case you have any questions. And then, yeah, Nate, take it away. Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. So welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here. Really excited to present some information. I think the OVA has done a fantastic job of putting together this series and bringing the volleyball community together in a really unprecedented time. The goal for me today is to present a bunch of information and to stimulate thinking for the coaches who are on the call and to kind of foster some further discussion, whether it's at the end of this presentation tonight at 7 o'clock, but to give you guys some stuff to take with you and to go look over and to deep dive into as you kind of desire to and feel it out. We're going to cover some material fairly quickly, and then we can deep dive a little bit at the end into some of the areas that are identified through the question and answer box, and also again tonight. The gist of it is I want to work through some technical work for you guys to prepare your athletes for what they need now and what they need later. We're trying to create efficient movements that transfer. So for every coach who's on this call, there's a little bit of a dilemma between what do I need my athletes to do right now and what do I need my athletes to do later. So if you're a 15U coach, you need to be raising some pretty good 15U athletes who are going to be good at 16, 17, 18. If you're a university coach, I need to be good right now, and I'd like to give my athletes some opportunities to go play professionally or to be productive members of our national team. So again, we're just going to go through how to increase some toolbox items for your athletes, and so you can build a curriculum. The overview, we're going to talk really briefly about serving and how to connect it. And we're going to go through a couple sessions of how you move and what you see. I think these are really critical. Whatever verbiage you use for that, whether it's reading, movement, and then we're going to talk about transition, which is a really big, fun topic for me. And then I'm just going to go over some things to consider for your systems. How do you put it together? What should you be thinking about? And then we're going to do a little bit of analytics, just a really simplified version of, are we actually getting better at what we're teaching our athletes? So serving, I believe, is the most important part of our block defense. It's a closed loop skill that starts everything. It sets up everything that we want to do. So I know Coach Preston talked about not doing tactically what you can't do technically. So ensuring that we're training serving from both a technical ability and tactical ability standpoint. So can they fundamentally execute the proper footwork, the right toss? Can we hit float serves at 65-ish kilometers an hour? Can we spin serve eventually growing to over 100 kilometers an hour? But can we also be able to put that where we want it, right? And understanding from a fundamental motor learning principle that we have to train speed and accuracy at the same time. So we actually can't teach, okay, we're going to learn how to serve to one, and then we're going to learn how to serve to one really hard, right? So making sure that those are coupled and those are linked in your technical plan. From a tactical ability, I encourage coaches to think about it from, how do I create point scoring opportunities, right? So aces represent about 10% of serves in a volleyball match. That might be a little bit higher or a little bit lower depending on the age level and the gender that you coach. But just to think about in terms of, how do I give my team the best chance to be able to score points from a block defense standpoint? If you have, for instance, Byron, the server that I chose to throw on the slide, set some all-time Canada West and U Sport ace records and was a point scoring machine for that UBC team. And just understanding he's different than a couple other guys who are in that photo, who are more tactical float guys, but still have to have a base level proficiency. Just to really quickly kind of hammer through a couple things, there's a whole bunch of serving strategies that you can go over. But understand how each links to your block defense, and understand that everybody's on the same page. So if we're serving behind the setter, what are we gaining out of that? For a lot of setters, it's really hard to take the ball from behind them, and they leave the left side ball inside. So is your block set up accordingly and your defense set up accordingly to what's actually going to happen, right? What are the outcomes that we're seeking, and are we prepared to defend them, right? Serving a front court left side inside increases the chances they'll spike down the line. Are we prepared with our block and our defense around that? Are we able to, depending on your level, taking out the pipe, right? So what does that free up everybody else to do? Can we pinch the middle onto a sideline? So a middle coming from position 2, right, who wants to run a 51 or a push 41 or something, can we pinch them to the sideline and make them hit something different or be late in that opportunity? Are we just going to flat out serve the worst passer, right? Then our high ball block defense can take over and we can get good opportunities. Do we want to overwhelm their best hitter? Do we simply just want to serve it in the court and understand that the more you serve in the court at an easier clip, the more your block defense is going to be pressured and strained, because the opportunities for quality side out offense are increased, right? Or do you have a no risk it, no biscuit type of policy where we're just going to try and score points from the baseline? We'll live with a bunch of errors because we're going to score some aces, get some one passes, some free balls, and offensively go from there. Understanding more serves are better, and link your serving with your block defense so that everybody knows what's going on. And if we're targeting one and we missed a 6, how does that change what we're doing? From a blocking perspective, we're going to group blocking into 3 key areas. So footwork, handwork, and eye work, and understanding how fundamentally we want to teach all of those things and how they work together. So we're going to go over 3 different styles of footwork, I'll call them. What I want to kind of emphasize before I go on is the more motor patterns that we want to or need to train, the more training time it's going to take. So we're going to have to teach the different footworks. We're going to have to teach the tool. And then we're also going to have to teach an increased number of when do we use that tool, right? So a carpenter has a whole bunch of tools in their toolbox, but if they're just pulling out a hammer and something every time, right, they're not as proficient at their craft. It's the same thing with blocking, right? Is understanding when we use each of them, right? And how do we train the minimum amount of motor patterns for them to be successful and continue to grow that toolbox as they're physically, technically, and tactically ready to move on. So I think that's just food for thought, and something that at your level and the level you're preparing athletes for is a consideration that I think you should take. And then the other fundamental principle that this is based on is we want to create great movements, right? We want great biomechanically efficient movement patterns so that our athletes can be smooth, which makes them fast. When you couple that with great reads, that's when those athletes are, wow, how did he get there? Or how did she get there so fast? It's usually a combination of efficient footwork, and they've gathered the information they need really, really quickly and a little bit before their peers. So just going through them, the step hop, understanding a couple things with it. You were looking for a plyometric response. We're looking for a really fast eccentric load and then a concentric step. So just understanding what you're looking for from your athletes. The most common mistake that I see at all levels when we're using this tactic or this technical pattern is that athletes leave early and line up in front of the hitter and jump straight up. So we're removing, it's basically just a hop, right? So we want to encourage them, and we'll show some video in a minute, but we want to encourage them to step and hop and to get that plyometric response for an explosive jump that's going to allow them to penetrate over the net and be able to take some court away. Some of the pros with it, again, it's really effective against speed. You can start your pin hitters a little bit closer to the pin and they can be dynamic still. There's less of a timing element as well because there's less moving parts. It's a little easier to train. There's fundamentally more block stability because there's less horizontal component to the technical move. And your pin blocker, especially in a high ball situation or a triple block situation, can set the edge of the block really nicely and allow the other blocker or blockers to close to them, right? It does present it's less vertically dynamic because there's less momentum gained. It's harder for smaller athletes to create a bigger block with this technique. And the attacker can actually pick up the block and the line of the block a lot easier in this scenario. When we look at the crossover three, so this is again, when everybody thinks swing block and when we have that discussion, this is usually the footwork that we're talking about. So if I'm moving to my right, I step with my right foot, I cross over with my left, and then I have 2 more steps and go up. Understanding, again, one of the common areas that I see for improvement from all athletes, and that we've had tremendous success when I work with blockers, is the first step is usually far too big. So understanding from a physics standpoint, we want to go slow to fast and small to big. So if our first step is too big, our second step has to compensate, and we start to slow down into our block, and we actually start to gain less momentum, and our body is trying to recover from that. The other thing to consider is the upper and lower body separation. So at my hips, can I have my feet going sideways and my head or my shoulders can be still looking through the net to be able to pick up my attacker, to be able to pick up the set, to be able to pick up everything that's going on. So again, it's the highest block touch because of the momentum generated. It's much more difficult for an attacker to pick up because they're not in that space until the block is actually up. But it is also a little bit harder to control a horizontal movement. And you'll see this with really dynamic athletes who go flying past the pin or are in the wrong spot or only in the right spot for a split second, making it a little bit trickier to train. But I don't think that this is something that we should view as, hey, we shouldn't train it. I think we just need to be better as a coaching group to be able to train it, to ensure that our athletes get the most out of it and when they'll be able to use that. The last one I want to briefly touch on is a crossover two. So it's a footwork that you take off of your inside foot. So you would go, if you're going to your right, you would go right, plant off your left, and basically almost like a step around or a slide footwork go into the block. It's incredibly effective when there is a time crisis, and especially at high levels of volleyball right now, the speed of the offenses is continuing in system to become borderline ridiculous at times. So just giving our athletes, again, another tool of, if they have to kind of step front to middle, or they have to do some different things, or they make a little bit of a slower read, can we give them something that will help them bridge that gap? Understanding it does, as a slide does, it does dramatically increase the force on a single leg, right? So if you coach a population that's predispositioned to ACLs, tears, understand that this might not be the footwork for them right now. Or if you have younger athletes, just giving them an ability to kind of play around with it and just being aware of how much you're training it. On the other end of that, the more athletic human beings that you coach, the harder it's going to be for them to control that horizontal momentum. So understanding as a progression, getting them to do it on their own and being able to go straight up and down and roll off the block and those types of things to avoid injuries and to avoid those kind of things. But it's an extremely effective, when taught well, response to some of the speed, especially for middle blockers, to be able to, again, if I'm a middle and I need to dedicate a little bit more to a 51 and still close to their left side, it gives me a little bit more time to hold on that 51. When we talk about blocking handwork, we're going to connect hands and arms a little bit. So just looking at, are we asking our athletes to do full versus short levers? So the two common ones, especially on a crossover three block for athletes, are we taking our hands, do our elbows extend and our hands go behind our body like a spike approach, and then they come up, giving us the maximum speed, the highest displacement from the ground, and the biggest ability to penetrate over the net, to create a big block and to take away angles for our attackers, because regardless of how high you attack, the court is only 9x9. So if we can cut off angles that make them hit different shots, we can create some good block defensive opportunities. Also, one of the big external cues that we use is actually driving our palms to the baseline of the court, because often what happens is, especially younger blockers, blockers will drive their palms to the ball, which creates angles for the attacker to just wipe and score pretty easily. So instead of telling them to rotate around or do these kind of things, just pressing their palms to the baseline actually gives them an opportunity to hold over and in a spot where if they do get a block touch, it will go down, or worst case, go back into the opponent's court. Hand disassociation is something that we've played around a lot with in our gym. And one of the big things we've noticed, and I've noticed, is as blockers, especially when we're trying to show something and take it away, oftentimes what happens is, if you imagine you're holding a string in both your hands and going to block, and when you go to dive in on a cross-court ball, for instance, your left hand, if you're a right side blocker, will pull your right hand and you'll open up a line shot. So what we've seen from some fantastic blockers and what we've played around with a lot is, can we hold the edge with that right hand and simply drop our left hand more into space? It's also allowed our outside blockers to close some of the gaps in our block that have happened from our middles, and we'll discuss how some of those happen when we're talking about reading. And then using your hands as the alignment tool. So instead of we're going to take line, we're going to take our inside hand is going to go on the hitting shoulder of the attacker, or our inside hand is going to go on the chest or the numbers of the attacker. So just being able to have them disassociate and align with their hands is something that I encourage you to investigate and to kind of take a look at. And how do we get our athletes an external cue to focus on to be able to create some of the alignment that we're looking for, and to be able to have a little bit of deception in their block while remaining stable and getting blocks. I think this is one of what makes the blocking sequence, especially, probably one of the more challenging technical and tactical skills that as a coach we're going to teach our athletes. This is the difference between good players and great players and great players and players who make money playing our sport. And I really do encourage you, especially if you have younger athletes, to check out Keith Wozniak's presentation from last week for some reading cues and some fantastic blues music and some other awesome things in that presentation. But just looking at how we're teaching, again, do we have a systematic way of teaching what we're asking our athletes to do? And so one of the oldest adages, and it's been around forever, is ball setter, ball hitter. And what I encourage you to do is walk your athletes through it, but have them understand that there are different levels of attention and different durations of attention in each of those. So as a middle blocker, against certain offenses, I may need to stay on the setter longer than my outside blocker, because I have to figure out when it leaves his hands forward, is it the pipe or is it the middle or is it the left side? Whereas in our block defense, maybe our right side blocker only has to know if it's going forward, he's automatically going to the left side, right? So just understanding how quickly can we get our athletes to pick up those cues. And one of the really cool ways, talking to a couple coaches who have used it overseas, is if you have your athletes physically snap their head through the progression. So if I'm a blocker at the net and I'm watching the pass, as soon as it goes to the setter, I'm physically almost reefing my head around to the setter. And as a coach, it allows me from the baseline to be able to see that they're shifting and when they're shifting their level of focus, which has been really awesome for us to be able to talk guys through, of like, hey, if you watch that passer's platform angle, you knew that it was going to be a high ball situation, but you stayed on that passer way longer than you needed to. You have that information, move on. In a lot of things, especially growing up as a middle blocker, I was always harped on to close the block, right? Especially defender doesn't make a dig, and of course it's the middle blocker's fault for not closing. But what we've recently started to do over the last number of years is teach all of our blockers to make a good read, right? So our middle blockers make an equal read, and we'll align a shot that we've either predetermined or adjusted in a game. So sometimes we leave on purpose a gap in our block that we put a defender in, or we don't believe that an athlete on the other from the opponent can hit. And it just allows us to, if our outside hitter is really excited, having a great game, and he fly by the opposing attacker, our middle blocker isn't just blindly going with him, and then we don't have a block set up in the right spot. So it's something, again, to encourage all of your athletes. It's one of the development tools, especially at younger levels, to teach everybody how to do it. So when that middle blocker you have now doesn't grow big enough and becomes an outside hitter, they're able to read the attacker just as well as if they had played outside hitter. Encourage your athletes to play and watch a ton of volleyball. I think one of the biggest things is the best players in the world have really, really good pattern recognition skills. And as a coach, I encourage you to do the same. Some of the best coaches in our country have just been around more volleyball. Like I think Brenda Willis, formerly of Queens, who did a presentation last week as well, has watched more volleyball than any other person on the planet. And Dave Preston has been involved in a number of different programs and has seen more volleyball than most coaches will in their lifetime. But I encourage you and your athletes to watch a lot of it and figure out what's happening in it. So what created that opportunity, or what's not possible in this situation, right? How can we eliminate options as quickly as possible for our athletes? So if you're playing a team that doesn't run a pipe, automatically, instead of 4 attackers versus 3 blockers, we're 3-on-3, we got a good shot. If we can then eliminate a C ball out of an offense, we're then 3 blockers on 2 attackers, and all of a sudden we go from a disadvantageous situation to being in the driver's seat. And then continue to ask your athletes questions. Continue as they're going through it of, what did you see, right? What made you make that read? Or all of those kind of guided discovery questions that take a while for athletes. Eventually athletes, if you have honest athletes, some will tell you, I didn't see anything, I just moved. Okay, cool. And then you can teach them how to go through that process, but really encourage them through question asking of, what are you seeing out there, and what are we doing? And then your athletes are going to be really good eventually at being able to pick up that information, and the quality of those conversations changes. From a defense standpoint, we're going to go over a few things. I think it's one of the harder skills, because it is very reactionary and sometimes is very much dependent on what your blockers are doing. So something in our gym we use, it's completely stolen from a Canada West coach, but on ball, off ball, and half, to talk about some of the postures. And we'll show it on video in a minute, but one of the on ball is, I can see the attacker can see me. I need to be pretty loaded because I'm going to see, especially in the men's game, a spike that's coming at between Mach 2 and Mach 3. From an off ball standpoint, that's when, for instance, in a rotate style defense, or if you've pinched your position 1 defender up for some tips, they know that they're getting tipped because there's a really good line block that is going to take most of that line shot, and we're going to deal with if they hit a fantastic shot. Being able to make lateral moves really quickly is extremely important in what we're doing. So just understanding, having a very subtle, having both feet firmly planted on the ground. I still have conversation with coaches who have their athletes on their toes and ready to move. And again, if you watch anything and understand even a basic physics perspective, you want your foot on the ground so you can drive maximal force into the ground to be able to move. And then understanding, having a subtle inside edge where you've shifted your weight a little bit to the inside edge of your foot, which will allow you to push laterally probably the fastest, right? And the easiest example to look at is an NHL goaltender has a little bit of an inside lean to his skates and is able to drive force in a more linear way to go laterally, instead of pushing down, resetting, and then shifting out, which is all the difference in making a dig at some point and not. Understanding how your arms and your shoulders interact, right? So having arms that are ready to dig and are a little bit strong and are a little bit flexed, but having pretty relaxed shoulders so you can move into those angles and create a little bit of an angle towards your co-defenders. cradling the egg is a big cue. One of the greatest things I can encourage coaches to do is take some opportunities, especially now where you have a little bit extra time, and create these like teaching cues that a ton of information within a small sentence, but also something that will resonate with your athletes, right? So something like cradle the egg to our athletes in our gym means that I have really big hands, I have pretty set forearms, and what I do is I simply, like in the egg toss game at a family picnic, I'm just gonna allow my elbows to drop and my hands to drop to cradle the egg or the ball in the dig and be able to control velocity. I think that being able to control velocity from a defense and a serve receive perspective is something that, as levels increase, becomes more and more prominent. And you can see athletes who are really good at it are more likely to be good passers because they're able to control some of the spin serve and even float serve velocities that are happening. The last point from a defensive perspective is, how are we digging hard driven versus off speed balls? In our gym, those are two different techniques, and we're trying to get two kind of pretty different outcomes. From a hard driven perspective, we're basically trying to get really big, trying to get hit with it and allow someone to set a high ball to a pin that allows us to be able to hit and to be able to take it. If our block touches it or it's an off speed ball, our firm belief in what we drive to our players, can we put ourselves in system, right? And what does that look like? So depending on the degree of how good that ball is slowed down, how well it's slowed down, or how good that off-speed shot is, will dictate how in system we've asked our defenders to put us. But just starting to think of what are some of the things that happen from a defensive perspective that are gonna allow you to put your athletes in a better opportunity or into a better spot from there. So I'm just gonna pull up a little bit of video before we go into what do you see. So from a blocking standpoint, we're just going to look at a little bit of move. So I pulled some video from some OUA and some international matches. So we're looking at the US middle blocker on the near side. She's going to do a step hop on a 31 and then a transition move that is a crossover 2 to the left side. So just watching, fundamentally, it allows her to read, and then she's going to make a really good move, get a good touch. She's going to reset. And then on a ball that's reasonably quick, she's able to actually get a really good block. The US doesn't score this point, which is one of the reasons it's in this Canadian volleyball presentation. Number 2, we're watching the middle blocker on the far side in red. Those two blockers fundamentally are going to see 3 left side attacks in a row that are in different spots, and just watching how they're aligning each of those attacks a little bit differently, and how the footwork kind of subtly changes while they do it. So we have a crossover. They're in a great spot lined up for our defense. On the second ball, again, a similar spot with a shorter transition move. And then a high ball that gets set inside. So they get their feet set. Our outside blocker sets the edge. Our middle blockers press with a good read. And we get a self block to finish off a rally. Right, so just understanding the tools and how they're applied from a reading perspective. The third one we're going to watch is some how to be over impressed. So just watching, again, our outside blocker sets the edge, and now both blockers are palms to baseline, right? So which is going to be a little uncomfortable for middle blockers, especially at first, because he's taking a pretty good cross-court shot away. But the attacker is outside of his body, and it feels like it's coming beside you, and just teaching them to be disciplined, to press their hands to baseline to be able to get a block. We're going to see, again, far side middle blocker execute a really nice step hop. He's in a full read on a perfect pass. He knows they're in a 31 offense, and he's going to make a great step hop to be able to get a stuff block on a 30. And the last one is going to be just watching the middle blocker on the far side is really late, is in really tough position, but he's going to use his crossover 2 footwork to get a pretty good touch. Ideally, we would like to see that come on our side, but on a pretty hard driven ball, he gets a great touch, and then he transitions. Unfortunately, we don't win the rally, but just watching, again, different types of footwork to be able to execute in different scenarios. From a defensive posture standpoint, we're going to see a couple different things as we watch this. So Argentina is going to give away give away a ball. The U.S. is going to be in system, and right as their left side is about to attack. So the position 1 defender is in an interesting version of on ball. The libero in 6 is on ball as well. So you can see he's pretty loaded into his feet. He's got some inside edge pressure and he's ready to go, understanding that his setter is not very big and that this ball is most likely going to come in that direction. We have the front court left side who's in an off ball scenario. His middle blocker has closed, understanding that the outside attacker for the US doesn't have the same angle that some of his teammates have. So he's going to be off ball, which allows him to dig a couple balls, but also transition out. And then you have a half ball defender who's kind of behind the middle blocker, but knows he may have to chase it off of one or the other. Again, a good dig from an on ball situation and nobody wants to go get it. But from a defensive posture standpoint, you can just see what we're looking at. So again, watching the near side here, the position 1 defender is in an off ball situation because we're helping on the 31 here. So we fronted it to take 1 shot. We know that our position 2 blocker is taking away the cutback shot. So 14 here basically has responsibility if that ball is tipped over top of this block somewhere into that kind of 1-2 area. Our position 6 defender, this is his version of half. He's a phenomenally dynamic athlete, but he sits kind of in that hard-driven ball with our libero. Our libero wasn't allowed to play on-ball defense because he's a really good athlete, and we're encouraging him to dig hard-driven in half. And then based on who the attacker was on the right side, our position 4 blocker is still finishing his block move. And then same thing again, from an attack standpoint, we have 4 athletes in some version of half or off ball on this roll shot. Our middle blocker has made a read. So one of the reasons that these 2 athletes have made a different read and we're a little bit okay with it is our setter is going to block a ball that we don't want hit with any flat pace towards one in this defense where we pinched our position 1 guy up a little bit. So he's going to take that shot away, which is going to allow our middle blocker to take a short tip, but more importantly, transition into an opportunity to score a ball. We run a transition pipe and score. Right, so again, our middle blocker is taking away a shot, not closing the block. Our position 4 blocker is aligned outside hand on chest, giving away that line shot. Our libero is going to make a really good read here. Again, a good cover. Again, so well-formed block. Our position 1 defenders in an off-ball situation. Our position 5 defender position 6 defender on a tip is looking to make sure that this area is covered. And again, our libero's in a half ball just in case. Again, from a defensive posture standpoint, what we're looking for. So I'm just going to jump back to the PowerPoint here. Again, what you see, so from a coaching perspective, are we training our athletes on our team to gather, interpret, and react to information in the same way, right? I think it's a little less critical of what, and it's more important to get athletes to start to gather information so that they know how to do that and they know what to do with it. So if you're looking at, for instance, an outside attacker, are we gathering that's an in-system ball, that he's a cross-court attacker? Are we gathering all those things? And then we all interpret and react to that the same way in our defense. And I think those types of skills, while difficult and time consuming to train, are going to allow athletes to continue to progress in their volleyball journey so that when they go play for that 17U coach next year, regardless of what they're asking, your athletes know how to gather and interpret and react to information, and then you can just change subtly what it is, and then they can continue on in their career. And I think that's the essence of having a system. Understanding information-rich areas versus information-rich body part. And what I mean by that is, from an attack, if we're playing defense or blocking, a lot of information is going to be from the attacker. And there's a lot of science right now that is telling us that instead of giving a really specific information point to look at, for instance, the hand or the wrist or the elbow, giving them, hey, let's look at the general area around their arm and shoulder. And then athletes are allowed from there to pick the point that most resonates with them, that they can pick up the quickest. So for some athletes, from an attack standpoint, they may be able to pick up hand action and make a great read. They may be able to pick up that there's a little bit of lean to that attacker and they're going to externally rotate, but not forcing all athletes to have the same point in that area, but focusing more in terms of in that area, there is something for you to be able to garner, and then having conversations with your athletes in terms of, hey, what do you see in there and how does that help you, right? For younger or less experienced athletes, you may need to walk them through of, okay, within this area, here are some of the things and when you would pick those up, and they're going to be able to have it. So the quicker they can pick up information, the earlier that cue can be. Again, using if-then statements. The if is the part we need to train our athletes to gather. So what's happening? How quickly can we decipher what's going on? The then part is the fixed part. That's just the reaction to so if they run a 31, we will front it. We have to teach our middle blockers to gather the information as early as possible that their opposing blocker is on a 31 or shoot or whatever verbiage you want to use. And as soon as they gather that, they know that they have to take a step and a half, 2 steps, whatever your block defense dictates, towards that attacker, right? What's another one? If there's a front court setter, we will then trap. So we know that C-ball option is not very good or isn't very consistent, or they just don't want to set it for some reason. They're not comfortable doing it, and our pre-scout shows that. So then, as soon as we know there's a front court setter, our front court left side blocker can pinch in and help, if not take the whole middle, so that we can have 2 blockers on some other areas, right? If out of system, then triple, right? So those are some just easy examples that we can walk through with our athletes to be able to have them understand what we're doing. One of the biggest things is the difference between men's and women's volleyball. The higher levels you go is in women's volleyball, there's more opportunity there's opportunity for more digs and of higher quality, right? So you're going to have a slightly different defensive posture and maybe playing a lot more half ball where you can dig a hard driven ball that comes at you, but the balls that are getting chipped around or different types of shots, you're actually able to control and get better opportunities of higher quality digs to be able to actually transition that ball and be able to go. In men's volleyball, hard driven, there's a lot of get big and get hit, right? We're just trying to keep the balloon off the floor so that we have a chance, right? If it gets by our block at the highest levels right now, it's really difficult to dig with any precision. But then we also have to be good with, hey, if they make a mistake and make a bad roll shot or tip to the wrong person or just flat out give it to our setter, do we have an opportunity to be able to score? So just something to be able to consider. Again, there's a number of ways as coaches that we can help our athletes to better read the game. Again, mentioned earlier in a slide, and let them watch a ton of volleyball, right? YouTube is a fantastic resource right now you can get volleyball from everything. FIVB is continuing, especially in quarantine, to release more and more matches onto their YouTube channels. What we can also do is help from a game plan perspective. So that's going to vary depending on resources, depending on time, depending on staff, depending on athlete. But what I do encourage you is whatever level you're at, encourage your athletes. This is what we're going to do. And then in a debrief or on video later, we're going to look and go, how often did we do it, right? So we said that we wanted to, when there's a front court setter, we're going to serve behind the setter into position 1 to get that left side ball inside. We're going to set up a cross court block. We're going to defend out, right? Okay, did we do it? Was it successful? In game, you can have an idea of if it's being successful or do you need to make an adjustment, right? So we can give our athletes some information both pre and during the game to understand what's going on and to be able to direct them in the areas of this is most likely to happen, right? So it's things as simple as who's their best attacker? Is he or she an internal or an external rotator, right? So a left side who's an internal rotator who gets set inside is going to have a hard time with pace going off the middle blocker out the sideline, right? But they may be able to try and force it back to the line. So that block alignment is different than an external rotator who that's the ball that they want, right? So they're going to be able to go inside the block or high off that blocker's hand. So it's going to change the way we play defense a little bit. It's going to change the posture. Also, what are we giving up and how long are we giving it up? Right. So we may say, hey, you know what? They're going to set the middle 6 times all match. It's not a big deal. We're going to give it up. Are we okay if they set it 7 times, 10 times, 15 times? Right. And I think as a coach in a group, you're going to have to make some decisions as to, you know, when you're going to flip your adjustments or be able to do something different. Transition, I think is, I lied before when I talked about serving being the most important part. I think the transition has probably the most bang for your buck in a training environment to be able to increase the number of point scoring opportunities that you have. So stuff blocks are points, they're a small number. That being said, in the men's game, you have to be a good fundamental blocking team. Otherwise, you're going to get torn apart. I think the difference in the games and one of the key differences from my understanding and from our data, in men's volleyball, this difference between an athlete's spike touch and their block touch is really significant. Sometimes upwards of a foot or more, depending on how well trained the athlete is. In women's volleyball, especially as you go higher, though, their spike and block touches are far closer, within a few inches sometimes of each other. So some of the interactions that happen, especially at national team levels, U Sport levels, there's a lot of attack block interactions. When you look sometimes at an international men's game, you see an attacker who is attacking the ball at 11-8, 11-9, 12 feet, and a block touch that's not there. So there's some fundamental differences in that, but just understanding that you have to train your ability to block, and it's going to help your defenders. That being said, at no level do digs equal points, right? Maybe in we've done it in our gym before where like if you get a quality dig on a hard driven ball in an off ball position, you get a point, but in real matches they don't. But the kill from that transition from that dig gets you points, and kills are really, really important in order to win matches. I encourage you to have a plan on and an understanding of, are we training transition from a bunch of different situations? So the common one that I see in gyms is an athlete will go block and then a ball will get tossed to a libero who will pass it and they'll transition. Great. But what about a front court dig? So on the left side, ball gets set to their left side. I have to dig out of 4 and then transition. What's that footwork and read look like? If I'm on a tip and roll situation, how does that look differently? So I have to go get the tip behind our block. Where do I transition to? Are you playing in the backcourt and transitioning to a pipe or a C ball? And then what if you're just not involved at all? How does that change what we're doing? So you're kind of covering or not? How do we systematically train those? And are we spending enough time? And what are the common ones, right? So depending on level, a backcourt dig for a position 6 guy, right? So our left side traditionally plays in 6. He gets a dig. In our offense, we want him running pipe really hard every time in transition. If you're not running a pipe at all, then you don't have to spend as much time doing that. Understanding that high ball setting and attacking. There's a fantastic presentation from last week from Jimmy L. Turk, who did a great job of getting into that. But I just want to say it's really important to train. We have one rule in our gym about high ball setting is the second ball is set to the net, no matter where you are. So if you're running up the baseline and trying to kick it, your mentality is we're putting that on the tape on a pin for someone to at least recycle. Again, Jimmy talked about, but decision making and transition, right? When can I terminate? When do I have to recycle? When can I give it away? Again, building those areas into your curriculum and helping them. Like the first point might just be, hey, you can't swing as hard as you can on everything. And then it becomes, okay, how do we get the ball back if I can't score on it? And then I encourage you to have transition of some kind in a lot, if not all, of your defensive drills. So even when we're doing a pure defensive drill or block drill, we don't kill the drill until, if an attacker hits it, a defender digs it, everybody has ran back to transition, we'll set, and then they'll kill the ball after that. So just understanding transition hard, transition fast are really important cues, and just get them to do that. And then you can start to dictate how they're transitioning, whether you want to use, we use a lot of 4 off, 4 back, which is a gold medal squared transition that we really like. It just allows the first 2 steps, you're flicking your hips towards the court, they're getting you off. The next 2 are resetting it so that you have a 4-step approach as an outside hitter back in. Again, just some different things to be able to consider in how we're transitioning. From a block defense consideration, I encourage you to do a deep dive in, can we have a base block defense system that covers 85 to 90% of what we're going to see, or 85 to 90% of what our athletes are going to need as they progress, right? And then an equally important part of that is, can we have 10 to 15% that's this opponent does this that's different, or that's at a special level, or that's something, right? I feel like if your block defense at most levels can defend an in-system left side ball and can do out of system on everybody, that's going to be a huge chunk of what you're going to defend, and spending a good amount of time being really, really good in that, and then making some adjustments and continuing to layer on, like, okay, a great middle in system, what are we going to do? And having all of those kind of things, right? The basketball analogy I use to our guys all the time, because they love basketball, is something as simple as, like, we're going to train a bunch of different ways to defend the pick and roll, and then we're just going to figure out what the other team is doing, right? Are they pick and roll? Are they pick and pop? Are they, like, how are we? And then we just insert the tool. I encourage you to maximize your athlete's read time. And what I mean by this is, I still see a lot of defenses at a bunch of levels where, okay, we start in spot A, and then if it's a middle, we move to spot B. If not, if it's a left side ball, we move to spot C, and we're constantly in movement. One of the things that has had to happen at the higher levels is the speed of outside hitters and their ability to terminate is so quick and so dynamic that we don't have a lot of time to move. So from a base offense, I encourage you to look at, for us, it's how do we defend the middle of the pipe from the same spot. We also include the left side ball in that because it's the most popular for most teams. So those 3 from one basic spot with some reaction to it. And then there's a reaction if it's something different. It just allows our athletes to pick up the attacker in our ball setter, ball hitter sequence much quicker, and less time spent on thinking of, okay, it's a left side ball, I have to go 2 back, 1 in, where am I going from this? It's going to allow them to pick up things early in the approach, like that approach is dynamic and full steam, that ball's inside and they've already come inside, and you can gather a lot of information early and start to eliminate options and put yourself in a situation to be able to firmly get the best chance of having a dig. I look at common shots, right? And I think this is one of the most important factors when you're building a block defense system, because again, it's less important what defensive and block system you're playing than that you are playing one that's going to defend the shots that you see the most, and where do they go, right? So not a lot of attackers at a lot of levels hit pure line, right? They'll hit like 3 feet inside because it's safer and gives them a bigger margin for error. Does your defense reflect that? If you see a lot of tip and roll, does your defensive system reflect that? One of the interesting cases over the last number of years at the men's level for sure is we like to set the ball really tight, let our attackers push the ball into the block and throw it out of bounds. Depending on when you played volleyball, you think it's a disaster and a atrocity to our game. I think it's free points, so I'm a pretty big fan of it. But there are different ways of blocking where you need to kind of almost have 2 different contact points to the ball. When the attacker goes to push it, you release a little bit, and then when they think they're going to wipe, then you push. If you're in the women's game, are you defending the slide, and how are you doing that? What are the angles that most slide hitters can attack on? Do they have an extreme cross-court angle? if you're chasing them, are you giving them a line shot? What are you doing? Again, a high ball from both pins is extraordinarily important in every block defense because of how often it happens. And I know Jimmy went over some of the metrics of that at the various levels, even from a serve receive standpoint, let alone a defensive and transition standpoint. Again, an in-system ball to either pin, what does that look like? And then again, a backdoor shot, meaning it's not true line, it's inside the block. Can we make a move to that, or is it going to be too fast? The other one is there's always a trade-off between, are we playing to our strengths or opponent weaknesses? When those align, it's awesome. It's really easy, run and gun. But if it's not, I encourage you to always lean towards your team's strengths and then finding ways using those strengths, if you can, to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. Analytics. So if there's a couple of people on this call, I'm assuming who are going to have some interesting thoughts on this, and I'm welcoming some debate. What I wanted to do here was, actually, before we go to that, I'm just going to flip back over to some video and watch a little bit of block defensive systems, and then we'll go into the analytics and start a little bit of controversy. So again, just looking at different options. So everyone who's ever seen the Americans play knows they want to run middle and pipe. So what Argentina is doing in the World Cup is their middle is fronting the opposing middle blocker on a 31, and they're going to give up a C ball one-on-one to Matt Anderson, who's one of the best attackers in the world, but they're going to be set on a better defense on the pipe, the 31, and the left side ball. Again, 3/4 of the offense, they have a pretty good block defensive system around. So again, in this system, we have a couple on ball. So the setter in position 1 and the left side in position 6 are on ball completely. The libero is on ball because there's a lot of line there for a great attacker. So just understanding how those two things align, and then they get a transition opportunity. So if we rewind this just a little bit, a high ball situation, the U.S. is triple blocking their line relative, so they're going to let one of the best liberos in the world have a good look at the attacker. Aaron Russell, who's playing in 6, the defender is in a half because he knows he has to chase stuff off the block. And then Anderson is in a spot where he feels he can dig if it goes around the setter. Again, Argentina has flipped. They're not fronting it right now. So he's on a read with what is now a 50, knowing they want to run some 50 and some pipe in this situation, right? They get a good dig out of it. Again, a triple block from the US, which leads to a great slowdown, a touch, and a transition kill, right? So just understanding, even within a rally, how are your athletes picking up cues? How are they reading? And they're making adjustments accordingly. We're going to watch a little bit of the U.S. women's team in just a full read. There's not a lot of help depending on the speed. They're playing Puerto Rico, who's a little bit flat but not super fast. So again, a full read from the middle. The setter knows that cutback shot is an option, so she's ready to dig it, and then they transition out. In a high ball situation, they're going to double. They're not going to triple, especially on this athlete who's attacking from the attack line. One of the fundamental flaws, if you're not gathering and interpreting the same information, is what's about to happen. So the libero is in a half ball. She's ready to read down the line. The right side attacker is in, again, a half ball ready to go. They're going to read it differently. The libero is going to read that the right side is going to take it. The right side is going to assume, because it's so easy, the libero will take it. So she's going to start to transition. And then we get an easy kill for Puerto Rico. Right, so just understanding the different options of what we have and what we can do. So. All right, so we're going to go a little bit to our analytics, and what I want to do is just keep things really, really simple. Just understanding using point scoring per server or as a team as a metric of your total defense is the easiest way to look at this. So just understanding that how many times when we serve, or when I personally serve, or when our left side serves, do we score a point? right? That's a combination of serve quality, block quality, defense quality, our transition opportunities. And then what you can do is, as those numbers are less than 40%, you can start to dig into why, right? Or if they're above 40%, is it because they're a great server, or because they don't miss? Is it because it's the setter serving and you have a great attacking left side, you have your opposite in the front court for an option, and you have one of your better middles? So just digging into a little bit of that. And it's really easy for anybody with a little volleyball experience, like a parent in the stands, to be able to score. So how many opportunities did you serve? How many did you score? How many did we not? Right? And the rally terminates and you checked it. Blocking and digging sets are extremely random. They're really, really reactive skills, and in my opinion, are really hard to measure from a totality standpoint. Things like block influence, right? Did we really, by making a block move there, make that attacker hit that shot, or was that attacker going to hit that shot anyway, or was it just a bad hand contact and they weren't even trying to hit it? You have things like a fantastic block, so great footwork, great eye work, great handwork, they're in the right spot, and it hits a defender in the breadbasket, no dig, right? How do we quantify that block versus something else? And then the other way, where we have a poor block that's terribly formed and we make a fantastic dig because we made great defense. And then the final one that I really encourage you to do is start looking at, if our athlete did what was asked of them, when it was asked of them, and we didn't have a positive result, how are we handling those and how are we celebrating that? Because if we're teaching them the right things, that event and that sequence of events is going to lead to positive outcomes more often. So when it doesn't, we really have to encourage them not to change what they're doing, right? So Sally, you did a great job. You had great footwork, you had great eye work, you lined it up, you were pressed at the right time in the right spot. It was fantastic. But coach, I didn't get a block. That's okay, you're going to, or we're going to get a dig more often. So I think those are just some things to consider. So again, I know in Dave Preston's presentation, he talked a lot about from a development or a performance standpoint, and how are we planning and executing differently within those. And I think one of the things for block defense is having a development for either a chunk of or all of your year, an analytic that allows you from a development standpoint, are we getting better at these two skills? So what I encourage you to look at is a scoring system that rewards the things that you put together based on this presentation, your own experiences, more video, more discussions with fellow coaches. A scoring system for every block that is a point. So the ones I have here are, again, was it the correct footwork? Was the block in the right spot? Did they make a good read? And were they pressed? They did all four of those things. They got 4 points. They did 2. They got 2 points. Each block gets a score. You can then reinforce the good stuff, and you can create a training plan. So if little Johnny is consistently, his footwork's awesome, it's in the right location, but his press is terrible, you have an opportunity to then just work with him when he's blocking. You can have a coach there with him, or a teammate, depending on your coaching staff. You can have a teammate just talking about his press, and you're going to reinforce that because the rest of it's a little further along. From a defensive standpoint, did they make the right read? Are they using the right posture, right? Are they standing behind the block in an on-ball situation when that's never going to attack there? Did they execute the dig? And finally, did we convert it to a kill, right? So we may see that our libero gets a ridiculous amount of digs and the team conversion rate is like 12%. Okay, cool. We don't need to teach us to be better defenders. We need to work on the transition and work on the decision making, right? So it's just a guided training plan. And I don't know about you guys, but I know I don't have all the time in the world with my athletes. I know my athletes have a limited ability to get to intake information, a limited ability for recovery, and all of those kind of things. So if I'm training something, I want to make sure what I'm training is going to allow us the best opportunity to develop and to win. And there's a principle, and you can look it up, but it's an 80-20 principle. And it's 80% of the outcome comes from about 20% of the effort or the information, right? And so I really encourage you, whether it's teaching a skill, developing a system, find the 20% that matters. So the easiest analogy I can use is there are a number of languages where if you learn 20% of that language, you can be functionally conversational in it. Right? What normally happens is the opposite as well, is for the last 20%, it usually takes about 80% of the effort. So just understand where you are in that development, where your athletes are, and what are the big chunks, right? More often than not, we're not looking for marginal gains. We're not looking for 1%. There's glaring things that we can get 20% better at. And I encourage you to spend time on things that matter, spend time on things that happen, and develop a plan around that that's flexible for you to be able to go forward. The other thing I encourage is, as an OUA coach, I'm blessed. We have VidSwap and Volumetrics, and our athletes have full access to video, and we can tag them in it, and it's incredible. What I encourage you is, if you don't have that set up, look at an option. And I was talking to a technical director yesterday, and I just said, what about for like every team, your club fee includes a few extra dollars, and you get a decent camera that you can get from Best Buy, Walmart, whatever, that will be good enough, and a good memory card, and then either like a Google Drive, a Dropbox, whatever, that everybody pays a couple extra, and someone's responsible every tournament to record it. You then upload that after, and athletes can then go in and look at every block I did all day, and I can score those blocks on those systems, and just a simple tally would be fine. And then they're going to start to take ownership of their development and go, hey coach, like I'm a 3.4 out of 4, like, but most of the points where I'm not getting it are the location of my block. I'm doing great footwork just to the wrong spot, or vice versa. So things like that allow them to take advantage of their of technology in 2020, but also be engaged in their own learning. And then they can help each other as well, where you may pair, like, again, on a Zoom call or before practice, just have your setters talk to each other. Hey, what are you working on? I'm working on this. Oh, me too. Want to help each other. So from that perspective, I'm going to do this. I'm going to open, my email address is on there. It's also on our website, which is yorkulions.ca. I'm also on Instagram. If you or anyone in your club want to connect, if someone wants to do a deep dive, if you want to invite me for like a Zoom call or anything, I'm fully open, especially now. I would love to talk volleyball and help in any way, shape, or form that I can, even just facilitate discussions. I don't have all the answers, but I really enjoy talking about it. I really enjoy diving into it. And with that, that's the end of the material that I have to cover. I know I went through it fairly quick. I have some time now, if there are some questions that we can kind of go over. And then I know we have half an hour to an hour or whatever tonight to have some more fun with it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nate. So we don't have too much time for questions right now. There are 2 in the question and answer box there, Nate. I don't know if you can see that or pull it up.
Yeah. Yeah, the negative step. I think, it's definitely an issue. I think one of the big things is where you have your athletes preload, right? So oftentimes a negative step is simply them repositioning where their weight is or where they're putting pressure on, right? And that was one of the big cues is, again, having them on a little bit more on the inside. So if you think about like the big toe and the edge of their foot being able to push out, and then really driving, especially as they've gathered more information, of making sure that they're driving in the right direction. The other thing is a negative step sometimes happens when athletes' feet start too far apart as a blocker. So if my feet are really far apart, I have to gather myself first and then be able to take off. So if you actually just move their feet closer together and play with that distance, oftentimes they'll be able to put pressure. So if I'm closing to the right, I'll be able to put pressure on my left, drive with my right foot to be able to take that first step and then move from there. So I think that's one way to go through it. And some of it is just the read, right? Some negative steps are simply a matter of their processing the wrong cues or looking at the wrong things and guessing, and then they're trying to do it. But I think feet together, and then where you have your weight position to be able to move in an accurate way. Yeah, I can absolutely share on on ball, off ball half. What I will do is I'll put something together for tonight in the Q&A so that it'll be there, and a definition of what those look like so that everybody can have it. Yeah, no problem. Developing a block system around your defensive system. Connor, I think they happen simultaneously. I think you need to train. So the question for those of you who can't see it is, what comes first? Developing a block system around your defensive system, or developing your defensive system around your block system? I think first comes the technical ability to block and to defend. And I think you can have a pretty base system around them. I have, as a coach, never separated those two. So our defensive system is completely based on what our block is doing, and our block is completely based on what our defense is doing. And those two are so interconnected. And then when we train them separately, we're just training the parts that go into that system as a whole. So I think looking at it, if your block and your defense are doing different things, it comes back to our blockers and our defenders need to gather and interpret and react to the information in the same way to understand what's going on. And it starts from the serve, as I said, but are we preparing the same way for the same common outcome? And then when something weird happens, and the 10, 15%, the freaky shots, the random deflections, that stuff, we can react to it or just simply say, hey, great shot, and we'll move on. So I think making sure both are connected, and that the reads are the same, and then that the reactions are the same. So the expectation for, hey, X happened, blocker, you're supposed to do Y so I can do Z, and you did A, right? So I think those are some of the conversations. So not separating it, but completely putting them together. One thing I will comment on, and I did want to briefly touch on, if there's anyone on the call who doesn't have, if you have athletes who cannot get over the net, I know this is a really common question. What I encourage you to do is still train their lateral footwork. So train a blocking footwork and have them go to the ball and then transition out from there, right? And I think the movement on cue is really important. That can be put into a block system when they're big enough to be able to do that. There's a clip I'll show tonight of Argentina has a 5-0 setter in the World Cup on the men's side. And what they do is they drop him out of block defense a couple times and just have two guys close. So there's different ways when your blockers aren't as dynamic. But I do encourage the footwork and the cue to the ball for those blockers and defenders.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we'll cut it off there and we'll save some for tonight. So thanks again, Nate, so much for presenting today. This recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, which is OVA HP Videos, and on our Team Ontario website. Tomorrow, Matt Ragonia will be here talking about coach-athlete relationships at 10 a.m. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us this morning. Have a great day, and we'll see everyone tonight. Thanks again, Nate.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.